So Dan and Ken, thank you for being the longest standing members of All God's Children Metropolitan Community Church. You two are two of the people that we know are responsible for helping the church go through the many variations that it has gone through. And I want to thank you for hanging in there, for not giving up on God and not giving up on us, and certainly never giving up on All God's Children MCC. So can you tell us what was the social climate for LGBTQIA plus people in the 1974, 1976 time frame, and when All God's Children was being birthed?
I came out in 1975, so I really can't speak a lot about what it was like before then. But in 1973 was the first time I saw a Pride parade. The Pride Festival had, I think it was 40 people. Gene Treader thinks it was 75 in Loring Park. It wasn't a festival. It was a bunch of people stood up on a stage and gave speeches, political speeches. Both Minneapolis and St. Paul had passed what we call gay rights ordinances before the church was founded, which I think was remarkable. So there was a beginning of a good climate. The relationship with the Minneapolis police, on the other hand, was awful. But people felt very free to go to the bars, to walk down Hennepin Avenue. To my knowledge, there were not a whole lot of people or much gay bashing going on, although there was some. And the Minneapolis police were known to let the dogs out on New Year's Eve when the saloon was closing.
No, this was a time not like any time ever before. Most people in our community were living a sheltered life. People coming to MCC, I remember a lot of them would park their cars several blocks away and come over to church looking over their shoulder. And most people who attended church would only use their first name, and everyone when making their donations would refuse to make out checks to the church for fear of it being traced by the bank. So that's the kind of atmosphere we had back then.
My goodness, things have really changed, haven't they? And for the better, because of people like you, for advocacy for gay and lesbian people, and for hanging in there with the church so that the church could still be here today. How radical was it to start a church in Minneapolis for LGBT people in the 70s? And what obstacles or surprises did the church face?
I don't know about starting a church per se. We were part of a revolution. There were 4 other groups of roughly the same size. There were the Episcopalians, Integrity, there was Lutherans Concerned, and there was Catholics Dignity. MCC met on Sunday afternoons. The others switched Friday evenings for their services, and we'd all go to all of the other stuff. Dignity was still at the Newman Center before they were kicked out. There were demonstrations before this was formed. There was a big demonstration in front of Northwest Bell. And I've forgotten who it was, but he was fired for being gay, even though we had an ordinance in town. One of my biggest memories, and I think it was 1978, was when, no, it had to be earlier than that, but Anita Bryant had already won the vote in Miami, Florida. This was before St. Paul had its vote. But she was going to dedicate a fruit warehouse in St. Paul. And there was a huge drought going on in San Francisco, which she blamed on the openness of the gays. And she arrived, and we had a huge demonstration. We called it National Fruit Day. It was pouring rain during that whole demonstration. No one could hear a thing. No one could hear anyone else talk. It was so rainy. But we were shouting, "Where's the drought, Anita?" That's what I remember. And there were those kinds of small demonstrations that happened from time to time.
I love it. So God showed up just when God needed to show up. Yeah, I love it. What do you remember from that time, Dan?
Well, I remember that demonstration, and I remember that they were using the figure 700 people that showed to confront Anita Bryant. And she just did her song and thanked everybody and left. And that was it.
So what was it like for you to find a spiritual home where you could be open and be yourself? A spiritual home that accepted you and celebrates you just the way you are?
I had one big difference from most everyone else, is that I never doubted that God loved me. Because things like bigotry and prejudice and hate, those are all human things. I mean, surely God is beyond that. And that's why I try not to get into arguments or debates with these people, because most of them don't know what they're talking about.
Well, my big thing was I was raised without any of this guilt. I was raised Unitarian. So I knew God loved me. And my thing with my family was more becoming a Christian rather than coming out as a gay man. It was a really, for me, the wonderfulness happened to me when I was on the floor of the General Conference in Dallas in 1975. And it was such a spiritual transformation for me. I sang in the choir. I ended up accidentally sitting next to a famous elder at the time, Reverend Frida Smith, and we had lots of talks about my coming out and stuff. Just to find that there were so many people who could worship God with truth and happiness, it was wonderful.
How did the church grow within the community?
We had all sorts of ups and downs. In 1976, our pastor was the Grand Marshal. Joan Johnson was the Grand Marshal of the Pride Parade. By that time, it had grown significantly from what it had been. It might have been it couldn't have been 76. It had to be 77 or 78. And we were known as one of the great institutions of GLBT people in the Twin Cities. And then she got sick and resigned, and they were desperate for a pastor, so they hired the most unqualified person I've ever known to be a pastorate. And within 3 years, we were down to an average attendance of about 10. We were worshiping to a record player. It was awful. But we hung in there, and we eventually got him out and hired a former elder, Reverend Roy Burchard, who completely turned us around. When Marshall was here, we left the Friends Meeting House and they used the whole building fund that we had to pay a year's rent in advance on a storefront, which is now Cafetto's House and Coffee House. That caused a whole bunch of the congregation to leave, including George Fitzgerald and his wife, I've forgotten her name, who were the major benefactors of the building fund. They were the parents of one of our main members at the time. But when Roy came here, he gave us a very, very steady hand. And we grew slowly. The St. Paul Church merged into the Minneapolis Church. That's when we became all God's children. And our motto was find a pastor, move. I've forgotten the third one, but we moved to 700 East Lake Street on the corner of Park and Lake. And that was when we really started growing. Roy left, Arlene Ackerman joined us. We were absolutely full. We had to put people downstairs, I'm sure, against fire code, downstairs for worship. And tall people were hitting their heads. We had to lock people out of the church on Easter Sunday, out of the building, because there was absolutely no more space. And then in August of '86, we were very fortunate enough to find this building. One of our members happened to attend church here. It was called the Peace Bible Church. And they had spent all of their time renovating the church and not making their contract for deed payments. So we got it. And we had a big procession down Lake Street. The police forgot that we had got requested and been granted a parade permit. So we had to just fight the traffic on Park Avenue walking south. And we came into the building complete with orange pew pads and Bible characters drawn on the walls.
Dan, I'd like to ask you, how has the community surrounding the church in this neighborhood, the current church building, changed over time?
Well, the major change is the feeling of fear. And like I said earlier, people would come to church looking over their shoulder and so. But now I see people just come right in. Mm-hmm. And I said, no, that has got to be God's work.
So over the years, All God's Children has done a lot of outreach within the community, standing for social justice and equity for all people. Tell us about how the Do Unto Others Fund, the Duo Fund, got established, and why was it so important to establish that designated fund? Dan, I believe you had a lot to do with that.
I think it was May of 1983 that our board of directors was debating whether to start this duo. And it was controversial. And people were saying things like, well, yes, it would be nice to help out other people in the community, but we're a small congregation ourselves, and we have a modest budget. Can we afford it? And then a member of the congregation stood up to speak, and I don't remember who it was, but their words are still ringing in my ears when they said, whatever amount we can raise, God will bless and multiply it and turn it into a miracle. And that the ministry that we call Do Unto Others started out under the name A Mile of Pennies. And And since then, I myself have been close enough to see and to hear the returns. And I can tell you that our name, All God's Children, MCC, has been spoken many times outside the doors. And only good things have been said about us.
Reverend Paul Tucker, at one point said we'd gotten a check for $500 in the mail from someone who'd gotten a direct cash grant from us years ago to pay their damage deposit. And, it was just out of the blue that this person decided to repay something they didn't need to repay. And he brought it up to us, and I think that's right around when we started giving cash gifts again.
So I love thinking about the Duo Fund and the many years that the Duo Fund has been used to serve other people. That All God's Children knew that to represent Jesus, to help people understand the love and the presence of God, they had to step up and to serve and to give something away to others. I think that is fantastic. Absolutely fantastic. That helps me also to understand why this phrase, all God's children serving all God's children, is so important here. So thanks for sharing about the Duo Fund. So All God's Children has sustained the congregation, and even though they have experienced many ups and downs over the last 49 years. And I'm just wondering, what is it that's held the congregation together during these seasons of change that helped them to be so resilient and not afraid of change?
I think it's God. Because over the years, people have asked me, how do you, well, what is it that kept you coming back? And I said, well, it's just that I come to church for church, not to see who's there or to see who's chasing who's partner. I came to worship God. And that's it. God has always made it a meaningful experience for me.
I would say faith and trust in God. We just know that there will be better days ahead, even if there are going to be some setbacks.
As charter members and long-standing members of All God's Children, MCC, what does the church mean to you personally?
Like we just said, the church is a place where you can come and just be yourself. I've seen other churches where people are, I don't know, I could even say it, but phony. And I just look forward to God being there all the time.
I'd say it's the foundation of my faith. I moved so that I'm only 8 blocks away. And even when I get dispirited, I know that it's always here.
Okay, so Ken and Dan, if there's one thing that you could tell people to encourage them over the next 49 years of the life and ministry of All God's Children MCC, what would that be?
I think that it would be to stay the course, to continue to trust in leadership, to work with the leaders that we have, to make changes when are necessary, and to go forth with the love of God.
I can just echo those words. That just believe. And what's the saying I heard? It said, keep the faith, and the faith will keep you.
All right, so Dan and Ken, thank you so much for sharing with me today. And thank you also for just not sharing words, but you live the words that you shared with us today. And that's very meaningful for me. And I know meaningful for many other people. Thank you for being willing to be open about who you are, who God has created you to be, and sharing that with others here and with the world. And thank you for being stellar members of all God's children so that we could have hope in knowing that God is with us always, that God will meet us wherever we are, that God will remind us that we are loved through any situation and all circumstances. But mostly, thank you for being people who love God and are willing to share that with others. I think that both of you are amazing people, and I want you to know that. Thank you for helping us know what it means to be all God's children, MCC, for all God's children. You're brilliant.
Thank you.
You're welcome.